And for more on CNA's coverage on Indonesia's presidential election, we're joined by Vikram Nehru, speaking to us live from Washington, D.C. He is the Senior Fellow for Foreign Policy Institute at the Johns Hopkins University School of Advanced International Studies. Vikram, thank you for joining us. Good to have you with us. Now, firstly, Prabowo Subianto and Gibran's team have claimed victory in one round. And according to a quick count results, how reliable are these quick counts historically in Indonesian election? And what might be different this time, seeing that Prabowo is rather confident?
Well, he may be confident, and it is true that in the past, exit polls and quick counts have been fairly accurate in predicting the results of Indonesian elections. But, you know, there are many things that could potentially differ this time. For example, we might have incorrect sampling, or there might be some mistakes in the counting. So we'll have to wait and see what the official results are. But in the past, these have been fairly accurate.
Now, how might Prabowo Subianto's presidency impact Indonesia's domestic policies, especially in terms of human rights, given his military background and the controversy surrounding it?
Well, Prabowo has run a campaign where he has emphasized that he will continue the policies that have been followed by President Jokowi. The fact that he has President Jokowi's son as his vice presidential candidate sort of adds greater weight to that point. So many of Jokowi's priorities, infrastructure development, focusing on downstream production of minerals, continuing to improve the welfare of the poor through various transfer programs. All of these, I think, are going to continue under Prabowo, at least as far as this campaign is concerned. I did indeed ask the Prabowo campaign as to what their views were on governance, and heard very reassuring statements that they would be extremely concerned about reducing corruption, protecting human rights, and so forth. But we'll have to wait and see what actually is done under his administration.
Here's one burning question. How much is Gibran Rakabuming Raka as a running mate to Prabowo a contributing factor to the massive vote share garnered by the former general?
I think Prabowo's choice of Gibran as his vice presidential candidate was instrumental in promoting his popularity in the country. But one must recognize that Jokowi is an incredibly popular politician. His popularity ratings are in excess of 80%, even towards the end of his tenure. And there is no doubt in my mind that in Indonesia, patronage power is very important. And before his choice of Gibran as his running mate, Prabowo was sort of more or less on par, maybe slightly ahead in the polls of the other two contenders. But after Gibran was confirmed as his vice presidential candidate, his popularity soared, and it was in part the fact that he then had the implicit endorsement of the incumbent president.
Now, Vikram, Mr. Prabowo's potential win has fanned fears that Indonesia could go back to being an authoritarian regime. How do you think a Prabowo presidency would affect its foreign relations and standing in the international community?
Well, I think that Prabowo, as defense minister, certainly has been very active and fairly successful in trying to modernize Indonesia's military. So he's developed a bit of a track record under Jokowi. He has been able to meet with many world leaders. So I think as far as the world is concerned, as far as Indonesia's Southeast Asian neighbors are concerned, I think they would be willing to accept Prabowo as Indonesia's leader and take it from there. I think also Indonesia's political landscape today is really quite different from where it was before 1998, when Suharto was the president. Prabowo, the parliament has enormous powers. Civil society is very active. All of these factors are going to constrain or will constrain the presidency, whoever becomes president. I think what Jokowi has shown, though, compared to his predecessor, SPY, is that if a president chooses to be active and wield all the levels of power, then he can be, frankly, very powerful in pushing his program. And we'll have to wait and see as to how Prabowo wields those levers of power, how he is able to put together a coalition in parliament, making sure that parliament then supports his various programs. But we must remember that Prabowo as president is going to be head of a country with very different political institutions and much more diverse power centers compared to where Indonesia was under Suharto.
Now, you talk about the political landscape. This Indonesian presidential election saw a massive turnout of 205 million eligible voters. What does this level of engagement indicate about the state of democracy in Indonesia, you think?
Well, look, political participation during elections in Indonesia has always been very high. We've always had a very high turnout. What makes this particular election interesting is that something like 40% or over 50% rather of the electorate are Gen Z voters. These are sort of voters who have not had any experience of Indonesia under an authoritarian regime. And these voters, therefore, have only experienced Indonesia as a democratic country. Unfortunately, what happens in Indonesia is that while there is enormous political participation when elections take place, in between elections, there is very little political participation of the public per se. So there are while NGOs and other civil society organizations can be quite active, the general public tends to be a lot more passive in between elections. And that allows for political leaders to carry out programs without necessarily having too much consultation with the public.
Now, Vikram, you are in the U.S., and Jakarta and Washington have a strong relationship. How would the election results impact bilateral ties?
Well, bilateral ties are extremely strong. Just in November, 3-4 months ago, President Jokowi was here in Washington, and he and President Biden elevated the strategic partnership between Indonesia and the United States to becoming a comprehensive and strategic partnership. And that partnership has 3 important areas of cooperation. The first is, of course, economic cooperation on a range of areas. The second is on climate change and protection against climate events. And the third is security cooperation. Now, these have been long-standing areas of cooperation between the United States and Indonesia, and these are likely to continue. And, Prabowo, as defense minister, in fact, visited the United States in September last year. He had meetings with Defense Secretary Austin. So he knows the U.S. establishment, he knows the U.S. military, he knows the U.S. government. So I dare say that the elevated relationship between Indonesia and the United States will continue if he were to become president.
Well, thank you so much for joining us. Vikram Nehru at the Johns Hopkins University School of Advanced International Studies in Washington, D.C. Thank you.